So today's office hours are focused on public housing agencies. The audience is focused on public housing agencies and PHA software vendors. The purpose is to share information and provide an opportunity to ask any of your EHV related questions to HUD. The focus today is on reporting for the emergency housing vouchers. Please note that this is part 1 of 2. If you are on the webinar today and are experiencing homelessness and in need of assistance, please use the link that is on the slide deck and also provided in the chat so you can find assistance that is in the area that you are. We can go to the next slide, please. So just a few logistics. You've already heard that this session is being recorded. The recording will be shared at hud.gov/EHV. The link is also provided in the chat and on the slide deck. All participants are muted, but if you are having trouble connecting with your audio, you can call in using the number and webinar ID and passcode on the slide. Please submit your questions in the Q&A box. And if you're having any technical issues, you can also use that Q&A box to get assistance with those. Today's speakers and resource advisors are listed on the slide. We have the Department of Housing and Urban Development, Office of Public and Indian Housing Representation, along with the Office of Special Needs Assistance Programs and TAC. Our agenda today includes a review of EHV administrative and service fees, EHV accounting, some upcoming VMS updates, your records retention requirements, a preview of the upcoming financial reporting notice, and then as always, some frequently asked questions with HUD. I will now turn it over to Chad Ruppel. Sorry, Chad, I think I went over one of your slides.
It's okay. You did a great job. I would just highlight, so as you noted early on, and for everybody's benefit, this is one of 2, right? We know that we have an additional reporting guidance coming out. We'll hit on this in a little bit, but we're working on another notice. And so if you, we're going to try to cover as much topics as we can right now, knowing that we're going to have another session like this later. And so apologize if we don't get to all of your questions here, but hopefully we'll at least help where we can. So the first thing I just wanted to do is lay the groundwork a little bit here in terms of the EHV administrative fees, and we'll get into the reporting, but just so you all know, and I know that we've talked about this in prior webinars, I'm sure you're all very familiar with the fees associated with it, but we have basically 3 different types of administrative, or 4 different types of administrative fees associated with EHV. This initial $400 per EHV placement fee, which all the EHV PHAs should have already received. An issuing action fee. This is a $100 fee for every EHV voucher that's leased, where that voucher was also, the issuance of that voucher was reported in PIC within 14 days of the family actually receiving that voucher. And so the purpose of this fee is we really want to improve the collection and tracking of issuance data. And so this fee, I think, gets at that. There's obviously an incentive there, this $100 for PHAs to report all of their EHV issuances within 14 days, so that if that issuance turns into a lease, you would then get $100. And we can talk through the details of how that works, but just want to clarify this $100 issuance fee for anyone who has some questions. Next, we have special lease placement fees, $500 placement fee for every EHV family leased within 4 months of the effective date. So for everyone, this began on July 1st. 4 months, we're looking at November 1st. So that's $500 for every EHV family where its lease is in place on November 1st. And then $250 for every EHV family that's within 6 months. And this we're looking at, or assuming in most cases, it would be July 1st. So again, another special placement fee there. And then the ongoing admin fees, which you're all probably familiar with from your regular HCV program. This is the full amount based on the column A amount. And for these admin fees, you also did receive an advance of 3 months, but we will be adjusting those based on actual reported leasing. So all three of these, the issuance fee, the placement fee, and the ongoing administrative fees, we're planning to issue based on actual reporting leasing. And as you'll see that we have some recent guidance on that. I'll get to it in a second. So next slide, please. Again, we've hit on this a little bit just to reinforce for everybody. We've been getting questions on like, how can we use our administrative fees? And it's really quite simple. We have two main areas you can use it. One is for costs associated with administering the EHV program, right? Like regular HCV admin fees. So this would be, for examples, being the staff that are running the program, equipment used to run the program, contracts associated with running the EHV program. And then also the EHV operations notice allows PHAs to use their EHV administrative fees for service fee activities. And there's a whole bunch of those. We'll get to them in a little bit in this PowerPoint. But those are really the two things, running the program or service fees. You cannot, and it's important for everyone to understand this, you can't use your EHV administrative fees to support your other HUD programs. This is because of appropriations law. You must use them to support the EHV program. Next slide. So we had a notice come out very recently. It's PIH notice 2021-20. It's a very short notice. And for those of you who may have missed it, what it really does is just tell PHAs that you must report these EHV issuances, EHV data in the IMS PIC modernization system. Our initial operating notice had notified everyone to not use IMS PIC, that we were going to use PIC-NG, which is a new system we're working on at HUD. But we've hit a few snags. It's a little bit behind schedule, and we want to make sure we're collecting this data. We felt like IMS PIC modernization was the easiest way to go. And I think hopefully many of you, we've seen already that many of you have already adopted it for this program. And so if you missed this notice, please remember now to report an IMS PIC for the EHV program. It should be as simple as entering the program code EHV for the HUD 50058 or the HUD 50058 MTW. We know that some business software programs, though we thought it was simple to add the program code EHV, it turns out it's not always that simple, and that's understandable. We're working on an extension so that no PHAs, if your business software isn't quite updated yet, we're working on an extension so that you don't miss out on any special fees. But please know, to expedite this, right? Like, we're trying to still reach a point where all of this data for EHV is being reported into IMS PIC. And we are working as well on creating some tables that will make it easier for PHAs to track their data, make sure that what we're seeing on the HUD side is consistent with what you're reporting. I want to make sure you're to be clear that these issuance fees are tied to the IMS PIC data. So what we're doing is we're looking for one issuance 50058. So a 50058 issuing the voucher, and then a secondary 50058 showing the leasing of that voucher. And so that's how we're trying to track these unique requirements of the issuance fee. And as I mentioned earlier, the purpose of this is really, we want to encourage PHAs to report every EHV issuance into IMS PIC within 14 days of the issuance. And then if that issuance is subsequently leased, then you would receive the $100 reporting fee. And then the placement fee, I went over those earlier, but those are also going to be based on the data reported in IMS PIC. And the ongoing admin fee is the same thing. So you all received 3 months up front, or PHAs that are listening received 3 months of ongoing admin fees, and then we will make adjustments to that amount and subsequent additional payments based on the actual reporting of the EHV program we see in IMS PIC. Next slide. So the other big fee that we sent out with EHV, and this is really unique to EHV, is the EHV service fee. Every PHA received $3,500 in service fees for every EHV award. Again, I know we've talked about this in prior slides, but just to be clear on some other aspects of this, the fee is not tied to a specific household. So, it's not like we're expecting you to use $3,500 for any one voucher. This is more of a pot, which could be used however the PHA decides. And the allocation per voucher or to support leasing is really up to the discretion of the PHA. The allocation amount of the service fees. So unlike these other fees where we maybe gave you the full amount, the service fees we're holding a little back. It's still entirely, we're considering it your funds. You've been awarded them, but we didn't disperse the full amount. So you received 50% upfront. Then there'll be an additional 25% once 25% of the initial amount is reported expended, and then the remaining 25% once 50% is reported expended. So another way to think about this, right, is we're going to give you more disbursements as you spend these funds. We just couldn't give you it all up front. And if for whatever reason you do need it all up front, if you need expedited disbursement, please just contact the financial analyst at the Financial Management Center. Again, we're considering these your funds associated with that grant or with the voucher award, but we couldn't give you them all directly up front. And the reported expenditures would be in VMS, and we'll get to that later in the presentation. Next slide. All right, so again, I know we've talked about this before, and to jump to the bottom, if you have more questions about how service fees can be used, please check out our office hours recording from June 29th. But to summarize, the EHV service fees can be used for housing search assistance, security deposit, utility deposits, application fees, landlord and recruitment, incentives, retention payments, moving expenses, tenant readiness services, household items, and renter's insurance if it's required by the lease. So again, to summarize some of these fees, if you aren't familiar, and then if you have more questions, you may want to listen to the office hours call that's recorded, available on the EHV site. Next slide. Okay, so this has been a common question we've received from CoCs and PHAs, and it's basically, well, we're partnering with our CoC and we would like to give them a flat amount of our admin fees that we're receiving from HUD, right? That I think seems like a reasonable request because, we know that a lot of times there's a partnership and a lot of work being done by the CoC as well. But unfortunately, that's not quite the way that federal programs, and especially this program, work here. We don't allow any special sharing per se of the service fees or admin fees from the PHA to the CoC. That those type of arrangements to say like, hey, $100 for every family, like that, those sharing arrangements aren't allowed. And but you can, as a PHA who's receiving these funds, contract with any third party you want for EHV administrative functions and services, right? So if your CoC is providing some type of function in terms of administering the EHV program, either as an administrative fee or one of the eligible service fee activities, that by all means, the PHA can contract with that EHV, with the CoC, to pay for those services, right? And so there, in effect, there's a way still to account for those costs. But it's important that the PHA know that this would be a contract, right? Like they would have to establish some kind of contract with that third party. Again, it could be the CoC. And as you're probably familiar with other HUD programs, we don't allow, and federal rules just don't allow this. We can't pay in advance. So this is all for billable services. This is work that's actually already been performed. So if it's something like housing search assistance, we would expect that the PHA would arrange the billing so that after that service is provided, the PHA would receive the bill and then pay the CoC or whoever that third party is for that activity. whatever amount you pay, we ask that you verify that it is reasonable, right? And we explain reasonable, the federal government explains reasonable expenditures in 2 CFR 200. It's federal-wide rules there. But as long as there's a contract in place that the COC is billing for services after they're performed and the services are reasonable, then it would be totally allowed. I think we would see no problems with that type of arrangement. We would recommend that the PHA retain all the bills, right? Because that's the administrative record. It will be used for any type of audit purposes later. But that would be a way to help account for the cost that a COC or any third party would bear in administering the program. We do want you all to keep in mind still of your procurement policy, right? So we know each of you may have your own unique procurement policies, your own special state and local requirements. Some things to consider is that if other entities are interested in providing the services, that would typically be where a request for proposals is used. But depending on your procurement policy, this could also qualify perhaps as an intergovernmental agreement, a sole source, emergency action, or a micro purchase, right? So we're not here to dictate one way or another what procurement action to follow. We just want to make sure you're mindful that this type of activity would be a procurement action. Again, follow your local state requirements. And then what we would expect is that any PHA that was entering into one of these contracts would document it somehow, document the decision they're making, and then also document how they determined that the costs were reasonable. So I know that this type of procurement action, these type of administrative requirements can sometimes seem a bit daunting, but I think in this case, it can boil down to if you're really expecting that you would pay reasonable costs for activities that support that directly support the administration of these vouchers or the services tied to these vouchers, and that you're paying for those activities after they're performed, right? So if you meet those 4 checks, or those 3 checks, you should be doing pretty well. We'll work on providing a little bit more guidance, but we wanted to get this out right away, knowing that many of you are in these relationships right now, either on the COC side or the PHA side, trying to navigate how you're paying for the activities associated with the EHV. Next slide. I think with this one, I'm going to turn it over to Miguel Fontanes.
Thank you, Chad. Good afternoon, everyone. Cost allocation accounting for EHV vouchers. As many of you know, many of the EHV allocations to PHAs are small allocations, and it is very likely that both PHA staff and directors that currently manage the Housing Choice Voucher program will be assigned to perform emergency housing vouchers duties. Therefore, PHAs should update their cost allocation plan as deemed necessary to accurately account and report costs related to the EHV program. Our recommendation is that PHAs ensure that cost allocations follow 2 CFR 200 to ensure reasonable costs, both direct and indirect costs, are charged to the EHV program. We have included key references here to ensure local and state regulations are also followed based on appendices from CFR 200. Next slide, please. Our reporting notice will include guidance to PHAs operating under HUD COCC model. But basically, PHAs are permitted to charge EHV program fees to recover its central office costs. For example, EHV management fees, bookkeeping fees, and fees for portability vouchers are allowed. In general, COCC defined costs such as accounting and human resources for EHV will continue to be a cost of the COCC and funded through allowed fees. Please see Chapter 7 of PIH Notice 2007-09 for specific guidance on allowed fees and COCC in general. Next slide, please. We have mentioned this before, EHV funds cannot be transferred to the ACV or any other program. Not following this prohibition will overstate, for example, the ACV admin expenses, and actual ACV and EHB expenses will be commingled in the ACV accounting records. PHA must report EHB and housing choice vouchers separately. And the main reason is that HUD will be monitoring utilization on the EHB, and the EHB funding will be subject to recapture and reallocation. Next slide, please. So PHA level accounting, consistent with the Housing Choice Voucher Program, PHAs will follow 24 CFR 982-158 to ensure they maintain EHB complete and accurate accounts and other records, which must be available for HUD and other stakeholders for monitoring and oversight. Additionally, HUD has established detailed VMS reporting fields to maintain lower level of accounting and reporting records than those required for FTS reporting. As mentioned before, HUD will monitor utilization and will be required to report expenses incurred by EHB fee type. So for example, and Chad covered these items, for service fees specifically, PHAs are required to report expenses under categories such as housing search assistance, security and utility deposits, rental applications, holding fee expenses, owner incentives, and other expenses. Next slide. This slide provides the EHB data points, and we apologize for the small font, but we wanted to be thorough with this initial office hours on reporting. PHAs will be reporting on all these new fields on a monthly basis. We have added to VMS, contrary to CARES Act, which will be reported in a portal. VMS will now will include VMS expense fields for EHB. So leasing or unit month leased, HAP expenses, detailed expense fields were created so you can report on the uses of different type of EHB fee receipt. So you can see again, is leasing, HAP expenses. You will see preliminary fee expenses where you will detail when, on a monthly basis, when you spend preliminary fee received. Placement and issuance reporting fee expenses will be separate as well. Ongoing administrative fee expenses, and also the 4 categories of service fees that I mentioned in the previous slide. Among other fields, we have added also unrestricted net position, restricted net position, cash and investment, and other specific fields for the EHB program. By the way, probably an hour ago, Financial Management Center just announced that that VMS rollout will go out on July 30th. So PHAs should receive notification on that will include some links that will direct them to the VMS guide and for better reference. Next slide, please. Again, that's the VMS update. We the good news is that the FMC is done with the fields that have been added to VMS related to EHB. And the release is scheduled for this coming Friday, July 30th. The announcement, like I mentioned, will include links to the updated VMS user manual and quick reference guide. It's anticipated that PHAs will start using these fields for the July 2021 VMS reporting, which period will open on August 4th. I think Chad mentioned this as well. There's a reporting notice that is going through clearance that will include FTS, VMS, and IMS peak reporting. That should be issued mid-August of 2021, hopefully in time for the July reporting period in VMS. Next slide, please. About record retention, PHAs will follow 2 CFR 200, Section 334 to follow those requirements. The regulation basically requires that records pertinent to federal awards be retained for at least 3 years. which could be extended by federal agencies, in this case, HUD, and through written notification to the awardees. If HUD is going to extend that retention period, PHAs will be notified timely. Next slide, please. We announced through PIH Notice 2021-15 that financial reporting notice will be published. Again, we reiterating that we are, that REACT actually did a very comprehensive notice or reporting notice for EHB. It is going to clearance. At this point, it is expected that the notice will be published mid-August and on time for the July 2021 VMS reporting. In addition to that, we wanted to mention that we did have a discussion with the PHA software vendor community and HUD is changing the criteria for qualifying to earn the issuance fee of $100. And I know Chet touched a little bit on this at the beginning of the presentation. HUD is giving software vendors some additional time to incorporate the use of the new EHB code in the 5.8 form and 5.8 NTW submissions into HUD's IMS system. That's all I have. I'm going to pass it now to I think it's Ms. Anthony.
Yes, sir.
For the Q&A of the office hours.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much for today's presentation. Just a reminder to everyone, frequently asked questions are updated regularly on the EHV website, which is hud.gov/EHV. If you asked a question today and it was not responded to, we encourage you to please check back here. We frequently update the questions and responses, and you can find this as a helpful resource to you and your community as you go about implementing emergency housing vouchers in your community. So we're going to just go through a few frequently asked questions that have come in, and you can find these FAQs in the document that was referenced and showed on the screen before. So question one is, can I request an increase for PUC? If so, to whom should the request be submitted? So the answer is yes. If a PHA can demonstrate based on actual leasing and costs that the HAP funding is insufficient to cover its HAP cost for the initial term, the PHA can request an adjustment. Funding amounts will be based on actual cost incurred to ensure that the PHA has sufficient funding during the initial funding term to lease all of its vouchers and pay all of its EHV HAP costs through December 31st, 2022. To request an increase, PHAs can simply contact their financial analyst in FMD to request an increase. Next slide, please. So the question is, can you clarify if or how the agencies partnering with the PHAs on EHVs are paid? If the Continuum of Care or victim service provider refers a family or assists the family, does the PHA pay them by way of the service fees or out of the admin fee? And if so, at what rate? Or are the partnering agencies paid in some other way? So Chad covered this question pretty extensively in his presentation, but just a few reminders. So for additional information on this question, you can find it in section 6 of the notice, PIH Notice 2021-15, which outlines the administrative fees and funding for eligible expenses for a PHA who is administrating EHVs may receive. As a reminder, paying a partnering agency for a referral is not an eligible expense, and PHAs can enter into an agreement with its partners for eligible EHV expenses, such as housing search assistance or HQS inspections. Next slide, please. Can COC staff do the HQS inspections and be paid from a PHA's admin fee? So as Chad covered earlier, yes, the PHA can absolutely contract with other qualified entities to include the COC to perform housing quality inspections. In terms of expensing, I'm sorry, next slide, please. In terms of expensing administrative expenses to EHVs, if our PHA has a central office cost center, do we charge the same fees to EHV that we do to HCV? So the answer to this is yes, the COCC may charge the same fees to EHV as it does with the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Next slide, please. Are PHAs required to open a new bank account to disperse the EHV HAP to landlords? So no, PHAs are not required to open new bank accounts. Funding will be deposited into the HCV bank account already on file. The PHA does have the discretion if it would like to transfer funds to an EHV designated bank account. At a minimum, though, we remind you all that the PHA must account for each fund separately, including EHV HAP funds, EHV admin fees, EHV service fees, and all preliminary and placement fees. Next slide, please. So the notice states that service fees can be used for tenant readiness services. Does this include paying rent arrears or other debts owed by participants to address their debts from previous tenancies? So no, service fees cannot be used to pay to pay arrears. However, PHAs and their partners can refer families to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Treasury's Emergency Rental Assistance Program, or any other state and local programs that are providing assistance for this purpose. Next slide, please. Can a PHA overissue its allocation of EHVs in recognition that not all families will succeed in leasing a unit? So PHAs are not restricted from overleasing EHVs to account for success rates and or potential attrition. But as a reminder, PHAs will not receive additional EHV funding during the initial funding term to cover overleased units, and overleased units will not be taken into account for EHV renewal funding. Therefore, PHAs should exercise care to prevent overleasing where unit months lease will exceed unit months available at the end of the initial funding term. More information on this can be found in section 7 of the notice. Next slide, please. Is there any guidance regarding PIC-NG? So as Chad referenced during his presentation, we ran into some hiccups, some delays with the implementation of PIC-NG. And as a result, the department will collect EHV tenant data using its existing IMS PIC system. There's also a notice that was put out, I believe, at the end of June, notice 2021-20, which Liz put into the chat for us earlier, which outlines the updated EHV reporting requirements for PHAs using IMS PIC. And of course, we encourage you guys all to check that out. And if you have any questions regarding that, please feel free to email us. Email us your question at ehv.hud.gov. Next slide, please. Will HMIS data entry be required for EHVs? So no, PHAs will not be required to enter EHVs into HMIS. For additional information, please check out our FAQs, which goes into more detail about this data entry component specific to CoCs and how they may be tracking referrals accordingly. Next slide, please. Will the EHV program have its own CFDA number? So no, PHAs will report under 14 EHV in the financial data schedule, and our PIHs react department will provide accounting and FDS guidance separately. Next slide, please. In terms of VMS reporting, are EHVs considered MTW or special purpose vouchers? So EHVs will be treated as special purpose vouchers. There will be designated fields in VMS for EHV leasing and expenses. As a reminder, again, for additional frequently asked questions on reporting or program implementation in general, please check out the FAQs, which are posted on the website at at hud.gov/EHV. And again, those questions and answers are updated frequently. So if your question was not answered today, please feel free to check back on our website for additional information. At this time, I'd like to give our panelists an opportunity. If there were any questions that came in that we'd like to answer live, please feel free to flag them and we can answer them accordingly. Okay. Just as a reminder, again, this is part 1 of 2 reporting office hours. We are trying to align our next reporting office hours with the release of the notice. So please stay tuned to the website, which is where we post each week what office hours topics will be covered. And we will pick up where we left off on today's conversation in part 2. I think we can go to the next slide, and if any questions come up in the interim, then we can ask them accordingly, answer them accordingly.
So this is just a quick reminder. If you haven't seen it, we have a brand new EHV mailing list. It's on the bottom left corner of the EHV website. So www.hud.gov/EHV. We encourage you all to please sign up for this mailing list. It's the best way to eventually we'll be using it for our communications. And you know, if you want to stay in the loop for EHV materials, this is a great way to do it. So please, if you haven't yet signed up, check it out. It's a really quick thing to do. Next slide. So a couple quick reminders for everybody. So the MOU deadline, this is the deadline for establishing an MOU between the PHA and COC, is the end of this month, July 31st. If you're running into problems or you have questions on the MOU or anything else related to EHV, please email ehv@hud.gov. Want to make sure you all have your calendars reserved for the next office hours. We're going to focus on prioritization, and that is on August 3rd. Again, the ability to sign up will be through the EHV website. And then, as always, today's recording and the materials from the webinar will be available on www.hud.gov/EHV. We've had a number of these webinars already, or these office hour calls, and so please, if you have some time and you've missed some, check them out. They're all recorded and available there. And finally, we just wanted to get feedback from you all. Really, are these calls helpful? Are there other topics you'd like to hear? Do you like the format? You'll really set this up as a way to try and give you as much information as possible to really help you run this program, right? We know you're dealing with a lot. And if there's anything we can do to make these calls more productive or better address your needs, please just send us some feedback. It's ehv@hud.gov. I think that's the last slide. I don't see any other questions. I guess there's one additional question in the chat I'll take right now, just because it popped up in front of me here. It's how are EHV going to affect the agency's utilization? And we really would hope that the programs would run concurrently, right? So I'm assuming this is your regular HCV utilization. EHV is a totally separate program. So in terms of leasing potential, it's not going to directly affect your leasing potential of a housing authority. Again, that's totally separate program and the way we account for that. And to whatever extent your agency, hopefully we're hoping that the unique nature of both the EHV program and the program allows PHAs to manage both.
So Chad, any other questions, or you think we are good to conclude our office hours this afternoon?
I'm flipping through the open questions now. I don't see, I'm trying to look for some that are still open. I don't see anything right now.
All right, thank you, everyone. See you next Tuesday.